Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Agile PM Roundtable. Our roundtable is a collaboration between people from Agile PDX and the Portland PMI chapter that brings together project managers, scrum masters, and other Agilists to share, discuss, and learn how Agile principles and practices can be applied to the work that people do at all levels of an organization. The roundtable seeks to build connections between the Agile and project management communities, and we strive to create an open environment for people with curious minds. Through our partnership with Agile PDX, we are able to provide this video conferencing service and a platform for reaching out to the Agile community in Portland and beyond. All of that is made possible by the Agile PDX community and their sponsors, including Platinum sponsor ProFocus Technologies. Thank you, ProFocus, for your continued support of Agile PDX. You can learn more about the sponsors of Agile PDX at agilepdx.org/sponsorship. For those of you who hold credentials that require continuing education credits, Agile PDX offers a tool that supports the auditing of professional development units, PDUs, to PMI, and Scrum educational units, SEUs, to the Scrum Alliance. In the next 24 hours, simply visit the bit.ly URL that we've posted here in the chat for today's video conference and provide some basic information about yourself. Volunteers at Agile PDX will report your participation to the certification granting organization for auditing purposes. You'll still need to claim your individual continuing education units, but Agile PDX will report that you attended today for auditing purposes. At today's Agile PM Roundtable, we are very pleased to welcome a very special guest, Michael James. Michael is a software process mentor, team coach, and Scrum trainer with skills in product ownership, Scrum mastery, and the development team engineering practices that allow Scrum to work. MJ was selected as a Scrum trainer in 2006 by one of Scrum's original proponents, Ken Schwaber. Michael has helped countless organizations in many countries create the world's most popular online learning resource for Scrum, the most successful illustrated distillation of Scrum's definition, and the Scrum Master Checklist, scrummasterchecklist.org, referenced in books by at least 4 other Agile authors. Today, Michael will share with us his thoughts on why Scrum isn't making your company very agile, how misconceptions about the product owner role harm your organization, and what to do about it. He will set the stage with a 20 or 25-minute presentation, which will then be followed by Q&A with the group. Please note that there are a number of us on this call, and we request that you ask your questions in the Zoom chat. I will monitor the chat and call on you to ask your question. Please unmute your microphone to indicate that you'd like to participate in the discussion. We've used a similar format with guests in the past, and it's worked pretty well, but there's always more to learn. So please bear with us as we inspect and adapt. Michael has asked that we record today's session, and with his permission, we'll be making the recording available to confirmed registrants and to the general community via the Agile PDX Slack and YouTube channels. We plan on recording the entire event, including the Q&A. If you have concerns or questions, please feel free to use the chat during the meeting to discuss them with me. You can also follow up with us after today's session. And after our discussion with Michael today, we'll set aside a couple of minutes towards 8 o'clock for any announcements that people might have. Then we'll break shortly before 8 a.m. so we can transition to whatever comes next in our day. But first, a little bit more about today's topic. We often hear that the Agile approach to multi-team development is to pre-divide products into small independent pieces for different teams to work on, perhaps using implementation approaches such as microservices and coordination approaches like Scrum of Scrums. This advice illustrates widespread blind spots in the Agile coaching and training community, and today we will challenge those in our discussion. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to MJ to begin the discussion about the role of the product owner and how misconceptions about it can harm your organization.
Thanks, Dave, and good morning, everyone. That was a very professional-sounding introduction.
Thank you.
I want to see this guy that you're talking about. He sounds pretty impressive. And now you inspire me. I'm going to try to start with a joke. Let's see if I can get this right. A coder, a business analyst, a manual tester walk into a bar, and they each sit down at separate tables. The bartender says, "Why the long sprint?" I'll work on that one. It's a work in progress. So, there are 4 concepts or 4 terms that I'd like to discuss. And then there are a series of misconceptions which I think reveal that the prevailing approach that we've been using as trainers and coaches may actually be harmful to organizations, at least if we look at, depending what harmful means, and that's actually one of the things we'll get into. What is our system optimization goal? So one of the definitions I'd like to cover is a system optimization goal, the reason that we're doing the Agile initiative. And it's become very clear to me that we're having trouble because we don't have clarity about what the goals of the change initiative are. It's very common to send lots of people to Scrum training, for example, or to bring in coach and do team coaching, and not having agreement amongst the managers what the goals are of the change initiative. We can make improvements up to a certain point, or what look like improvements, but we may be harming the larger system in doing so. So one part of systems thinking is understanding that there is a system. Leads us to the next topic, which is local optimization bias. As humans, we have a tendency to optimize for what's right in front of us, or the short term, the near term. I suppose we've evolved to be like that. We weren't really created for the complexity of the world that we're in, where an action here can have a effect further away that's not in the foreground for us, or it has an effect later in time. And it's not easy, it's not intuitive for us to be thinking that way, especially most of the time. I'd say 90% of our decisions are made out of habit or habitually. Another of the terms that I'll bring to the discussion, knowledge creation work. It's a little bit different than, you may have heard the term knowledge work that Peter Drucker popularized. Mm-hmm. Knowledge work being work that skilled people create, or knowledgeable, trained people create based on prior knowledge or crystallized knowledge. And I'm looking at some of the work that we do, like software product development, as having some unique attributes. And the analogy that I usually give, you spent Monday through Thursday developing something. It could be a software product, for instance, or it could be a report or an analysis, or anything that's a product of your mind. On Monday, you had some ideas and worked on it and worked an idea. And then when you woke up Tuesday, you realized that a bunch of those ideas weren't any good. So you wound up tossing out most of it, keeping some of them. And then Tuesday, you developed some new ideas based on what you learned. Wednesday, you did some research and learned, oh, here's a solution I didn't think about before. And you got feedback from someone about how to make it work better, how to make your idea work better. And then Thursday, you've got it, now it's pretty good. You've got a pretty good thing. You think it's almost ready for prime time. But Thursday night, you lose all your files. Something happens. You didn't back up to the cloud or whatever. You reset back to where you are on Monday. But I don't think on Friday, well, actually, I believe on Friday morning, you'll be able to reconstruct where you were within a couple hours. This suggests to me that the bottleneck or the constraint on the work you were doing wasn't the typing. The typing speed is not the real constraint in knowledge creation work. What you were doing instead was learning. And the ability to learn, and the rate that we can learn, and our access to resources that enable us to learn, and our access to our colleagues and friends, the nearness with them, the amount that we get help. Those are the real factors, I think. But I don't think organizations are realizing this. Among other things, I think organizations are underestimating people's ability to learn, not by like a few percent, but by a factor of something like 10. I was just talking to some people yesterday about this, and they all said, yeah, we believe we can learn 10 times more. We can remember times that we were learning 10 times more than we do in a typical workday now. So organizations are not necessarily optimized for knowledge creation work. Another of the terms I'd like to bring to this is private code ownership. Now, this doesn't exist as a distinction for most people because it's just the way we've always done things. It's always been the case that Bob works on this thing, or Henry's team works on this module, this part of the software. It's kind of assumed that it should always be that way. And it has to be that way if we're not using modern software development methods. So if we're not doing test-driven development, continuous integration, mercilessly refactoring the code so it's understandable, we have a reinforcing loop that encourages private code ownership in most organizations. So those are the terms that I'm going to use. System optimization goal, understanding, part of that is understanding that there is a system, and another part of that is having alignment about what the goals are. What are we committed to, in our words anyway. The other term was local optimization bias, tendency to optimize around what's right in front of us, the short term, or something that's near to us at the expense of the longer term or further from us. The knowledge creation work, I will just say that's a different than traditional work was. The idea of the work, the main constraint on the work we're doing is our ability to learn. And private code ownership. This is my code only, that's her code. I work on my code, she works on her code. Now, some of the misconceptions that I think we still hold, and I'm not doing this on purpose to offend all the Agile coaches and trainers out there, but a lot of this is stuff that I believed also when I started doing this. So one of the misconceptions is the inevitability of dependencies, or the idea that dependencies are just there, they have to be there. And of course, dependencies are a real thing for traditional work. I can't start physical construction of like a skyscraper if I don't have the things I need to build a skyscraper. Doesn't matter how skillful I am or how smart I am. If I don't have the resources to do that, then I can't start doing that. And I can't really start the second floor until I finish the first floor. Actually, I don't know very much about building buildings, but from what I've seen out my window, there seems to be a physical order that things have to happen for traditional work, for manufacturing also, for construction. And this is what we learn. This is what we've been taught in management school. And we're bringing these ideas, which may not be beneficial to software development, into a space and they may be harmful where we're using them. So the inevitability of dependencies, I will suggest that for knowledge creation work, those dependencies are actually being caused by the policies and the structure of our organization. So those two things together are what I call, and Craig Larman would call, organizational design. Dependencies, now we may have, at least in the short run, we can't just snap our fingers and have them go away, but I want the understanding that the dependencies are probably caused by the organizational policies and structure. And just to be clear, I'm talking about organizations that are more than 9 people. Which is nearly everyone who can afford coaches and training and all that. So I'm thinking most of our clients, the people on this call, I don't think anyone here is coaching a 7-person company. If you are, that's very cool. All kinds of things you can do. If I had just 7 people in my company, I would probably just do mob programming every day. Or now I guess we'd have to do remote mob programming. And we don't need very much structure beyond that. But a place I spent the most time working with the past few years, it's a few hundred people spread around the world. And probably your experience is something similar to that. At least, dealing with tens or hundreds or thousands of people. So some of the stuff that made sense, some of the stuff that's in the Scrum Guide makes sense for a 12-person company, may not be beneficial and may actually be actively harmful if we're trying to do the same things in a 100-person product group or a 1,000-person product group. So the first misconception, again, was the inevitability of dependencies. Are they real or are they caused by our organizational design and our policies and structure? Another misconception that I think we all have when we walk into an organization with more than 12 people is this idea that all teams must be, I see everyone working really hard, they must all be working on similar value work. And if we could just get them to work better, work smarter, work faster, we'll be solving the organization's problems. And I think people in the companies also think this because of our local optimization bias, tendency to self-aggrandize the work that I'm doing or the work that we're doing must be just as important as the work another team's doing. But I think it's not too hard to imagine what was happening with my main client, which was everyone was realizing the work of one team, if we look at the big picture, we think about our system optimization goal for the larger picture, work of one team might be 1,000 times more important than the work of another team. And I'll suggest some of the stuff that we're introducing, some of the stuff, typical typical interpretation, I'll say, of Scrum would be each team should be working on their own list of stuff to do, prioritized by their own person. Now, this person is not what I call a product owner, but they will call them product owners. A person who's driving just one team in a large organization is what I will actually call a team output owner. I was trying to think of a neutral term to describe what they're really being asked to do. They may be letting that team self-organize within that container, within that context, but it prevents the application of that team's view in the bigger picture. And that brings us to my misconception number 3 in this talk, which is the idea that the team should have a narrow view. I think this comes from, in the first Scrum books, I have one of them here. I had one of them here anyway. In the first Scrum books, we were used to say that Scrum Master is supposed to resolve impediments and keep the team focused on what they're supposed to do, keep them focused on their backlog, which in some contexts, that makes perfect sense. But if we're working on a product, and if we use an honest definition of product, we might realize that what we're calling a product, according to the result of one team's work, may not be what the customer is calling a product. I was working with my wife to translate an article into Japanese yesterday, and they sometimes use the word product. Oh, I can't even say fake Japanese very well. But it turns out there are 2 words for product. One, which is the word we're using from a Scrum team perspective, but then there's what the customer would actually call product from the customer's perspective. And this was a problem in the translation. It's like, which word do we use? Because a lot of times, the prevailing definition is the first one, rather than from the customer's perspective what a real product is, a much simpler word in Japanese. And I don't think this was the intention. I think when I'll say the people who helped define Scrum had the idea of a product backlog, they really meant the same thing. They really meant about the product, not just the work result of one team, which is handed off to another team, which is handed off to another team or to another department. I think that we want teams to have a whole product view rather than a narrow view. And my concern is that the work that we're doing is often encouraging a narrow view. If we interpret, for example, Scrum, if we interpret it in a certain way, Scrum Master is supposed to protect the team from distractions, but does that mean I'm going to protect my team from another team who is trying to integrate our work together or needs a question answered for us to develop a product from the customer's perspective to work together? So narrow view versus whole product view was the 3rd misconception. The 4th one is a whole bunch of things, a bunch of different categories within the realm of, will the parts made by different teams fit together by magic? Or is there some kind of magic that will make all this stuff fit together? If we just improve each team's velocity, are we helping in the big picture? And this brings us back again to the system optimization goal. An example of a system optimization goal we think is consistent with agility would be improve the whole product development organization's ability to inspect and adapt its whole product based on what we learn from real user feedback from real customers. Hopefully most people are familiar with the ideas in lean startup. The biggest question mark is, what's really useful? What will people really find value in? What's really beneficial for the user? And if we think we know that in the beginning, I believe that's our self-deception. We have certainty about things. The problem is what we don't know. The problem is what we know that ain't so. In other words, we have certainty about this. And we would like, as an Agile coach, thinking about agility in the big picture, what inspires me is improving the whole product development organization's ability to respond to real user needs, which may be in conflict with some of the stuff that we're doing as coaches and trainers, trying to improve one team's output or speed the rate of one team's output. Some of the ways that Scrum in particular is sometimes sold, this idea of velocity being the holy grail of something. I will note that velocity is not even in the Scrum Guide. No book by Ken Schwaber that I found has the word velocity. I haven't even heard Ken use the word velocity before. And this is the flavor of Scrum that the less movement is part of, I'll say. A lot of us were inspired, for me, it was more than 10 years ago now, by what Ken was saying then. It came into a contradiction with what we seem to be doing now. It scares me. So the tools that are called, that have the word agile in them, most of those are harmful to agility. It's almost like if it has the word agile in it, I'm skeptical about whether we would want to use it. The tools for managing work. And a lot of people's concept of what agile is now is coming from those tools or from some of the advice that's I think is actually harmful in the big picture. So I didn't come here with the intention of offending everyone, but sometimes I manage to step on people's toes. That was some feedback I got from a local group in Seattle. It's like, you're saying we're doing everything wrong? And I'm actually saying it's worse than that. We're not even doing everything wrong. We're doing the wrong thing. If our stated goal is to improve the organization's agility, its ability to adapt to the biggest question mark of all, what are the real user needs, then some of the stuff we're doing, I think, is not helpful. And I say that with respect. I've been doing the same things. So other parts of misconception for the idea that things will fit together magically if we can just get people to do more stuff. Some of the silver bullets. Let's go through component teams. So we might start off with the assumption that we have a front-end team and a back-end team. We can just improve their work somehow. That will solve the problem. Will components from different component teams integrate into a feature without those teams working together? Or maybe we have an assigned coordinator, which is sort of the same as not having the teams work together, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure that came across clearly. Let's try this again. One of the things that made Scrum valuable in my first experience with it was the elimination of roles. So maybe I had a job title, and I had a fancy job title before I was on a Scrum team. But now it's just us, and I meant to leave that job title outside the door of the team room. And it's just us and our skills. We have our background, of course, and we're meant to be a cross-functional team, but we're also meant to work together and be flexible within the scope of that. So an assigned coordinator role is not the same as anyone on the team can talk to anyone on another team if they need to. How do we create the environment for that to happen is one of the challenges. By the way, that's the focus of LESS. How do we get multiple teams that's one of the focuses of LESS. How do we get multiple teams to act like teams of teams? So another variation of 4.1, and I'll send out a document with the descriptions of these things in more detail. Doesn't XYZ technical approach eliminate the need for teams to work together? Probably some of you are thinking about microservices right now. I'm not going to criticize microservice as a technical strategy because I think it's appropriate, probably is appropriate for situations, but I don't want people to have the illusion that it solves the problem of teams working together. It doesn't do that. And I remember for about as long as I've been developing software, I've been hearing about things that were supposed to eliminate the need for teams to work together. And I don't think there's any technical silver bullet for that. I think that teams, to have organizational agility, I think that teams do need to work together. Well, don't well-defined interfaces, open standards, do those eliminate the need for teams to work together? If we publish our API, then we shouldn't have to talk to them, right? They shouldn't have to talk to us. Just look at the API document. Look at the interface requirement specification. And we had these, I started my career in aerospace where we had interface requirement specifications. One of the things you absolutely have to get right in the beginning, because if you need to change that, it's going to be enormously expensive, leading to years of delay and cost overruns and all kinds of stuff. All this is based on the idea that requirements don't change. But agility was always for the fact that requirements do change. And in your life, I believe, in the work that you're doing, or your customers' work, I believe that their requirements really are changing. So the well-defined API only works when one side isn't changing. We can take a well-defined interface. HTTP is a good example, or there's a well-defined interface for mapping information, the XML standard. All these are great things, and I'm a huge fan of them, but they're based on the idea that one side won't change. For modern products, both sides are changing. I'll give a practical example. Actually, I'll delay the practical example. Will features from different teams integrate into a product without teams working together? So now we've learned about feature teams. The feature teams are a great idea. Instead of having a back-end team and a front-end team and a middle objects, we have a full stack team that can deliver end-to-end capabilities. Organizations are waking up to that. Unfortunately, feature teams are not the norm, but we learn about them. But we go in we can be naive about that, saying now we have feature teams. Now the teams don't need to work together because they're full stack teams. But it doesn't actually happen. We still need those teams to work together because you won't be able to predefine the exact boundaries between the work that this team does or what that team does. Or if you do it, or if you try to do it, you will actually be limiting the ability to reprioritize. Remember misconception 2, the idea that all teams are and will always be working on equal value work. So this was where Tyson said, I forgot this the first time I gave a talk also. Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Right? So you have a plan for, okay, this team will do this. This is a full stack team, can always do this. This team can always do that. What are you going to do when this team's work becomes 100 or 1,000 times more important than this team? Keep it that way? Or try to keep it that way? And in doing so, we actually limiting agility. And I think that when we think about it, we realize that, but we tend to think quickly and not see that. And then the last one, try to get this in so we can do the more general Q&A. Will products sold separately or as part of one suite integrate without teams working together? So during this COVID thing, I've been using some Adobe tools quite a bit. For example, Illustrator, Photoshop, Premiere Pro for video, After Effects, Audition for audio. The reason I would use one of these tools, the main reason I would pick one of them, is that it's, at least in theory, compatible with the other products from the same company. It turns out the compatibility is not as strong as it should be. But the value of these products together is much greater, not to abuse the word synergy, which I think was abused quite a bit, but I believe there really are synergies between products. It would be unusual for a company to develop 10 products which have nothing to do with each other and are all of equal value. So I will also suggest the normal habit of each team having their own product owner and product backlog is making things worse, is reducing organizational agility. I hope you read about that. I have a comic book that, if you didn't download, this is a Japanese version, but it looks like this, that I'm hoping the people on this call will have been aware of. It went viral on LinkedIn faster than other things that I wrote. That's told me that there really is pain and harm being caused by the way that we're teaching Scrum and the related Agile methods. I think people sense that it's making their own lives worse, and it's, at times, I'm not saying always, but aspects of it are making their own lives worse. And there are times or aspects of what we're normally doing, the prevailing wisdom, that are making the organization less agile. And so the bonus topic is alternatives. I will suggest there are superior alternatives to the Scrum of Scrums. I won't list them all now, but I'll give a link later on that goes through some of the other things that we've tried. And it's not just, so I'm part of the less movement, but it's not just us. I believe a lot of people have found there simply are better ways for multiple teams to work together than this hierarchical? It's early in the morning for me. Anyway, this, what should we say? This way of working which discourages the lateral flow of information that we'd like to have. And I'll give a link to some of those things. So the misconception that I think most of us have as coaches, or have had as coaches, the idea that we should pre-divide the product, that the way to make Agile work, because we know Scrum works and Agile works well for 7 people. So the idea that we should pre-divide the product, so this team will work on this piece, this team will work on that piece. And that very often that happens at the beginning and actually reduces product development's, the overall product development organization's goals. It's based on the idea that requirements don't change, that the technical problems will be evenly distributed, that all work is of equal value. These are all reasons that we suggest Nexus and Less and the Scrum Guide all say that a product has a product backlog, regardless of the number of teams. And unless we take that further to say there's probably really only one product owner, the people that we're calling product owners on teams, they most likely they belong on those teams, helping those teams, but calling them product owner introduces confusion about what the real priorities are, inhibiting the organization's ability to adapt. So the idea that we should pre-divide the product into, this is the part this team does, that's the part that team does, this is the part that team does, is a form of big upfront prioritization. You remember when big design up front was considered a bad thing? We discouraging everyone, no, do your design continuously. Why would we do our prioritization up front as a big step, the day that we know the least, today being our dumbest day of the rest of our development cycle? So that's the talk I had in mind, and almost finished it on time this time. And I thought we could, now that I regret any offense I may have caused, but yeah, let's talk about it. How do you feel about that?
Thank you very much, MJ. I had watched the video they have up, and I liked how you oriented certain things for today. Let's see here. Don't have any questions on chat yet, but while people are thinking about that, I thought I'd start us off with a question. So, how do you? What have been some of your experiences responding to concerns about the kind of fundamental technical and architectural decisions that either need to be made, or there's a perception that they must be made early on in the project? So whether it's technology selection, or whether it's sort of, okay, what are going to be the big technical pieces and parts that need to talk to each other? How do you balance that with with things that you were saying about letting the requirements and the solutions evolve over time?
I can't say anyone has the perfect thing. I haven't seen a perfect, this is just a tough problem, and it's partly the price that we pay for using 100 or 1,000 people to do our development, which is another topic. Is that actually the best thing to do? But it is the situation we have a lot of times. Among the alternatives, so in the download, which I'll put into the Slack group, we're not on Slack, in the Zoom group. Anyway, somehow I'll get you the link. One of the patterns that's suggested is leading team. This is an approach that was used for example, the 4GE LTE radio network gateway. This was a product that ultimately involved thousands of people, but they started this with one team. They started with one team of volunteers, because we want to start with volunteers. Right? People who are drafted to do something will sabotage it. So that wasn't, I didn't get into this kind of work to force people to do Scrum or any other way. But people that volunteer together can develop the initial approach. And that kind of, I think of it as ant trails. If you see how ants, are they called pheromones or something? Or one ant finds a solution. Actually, ants find a bunch of solutions, but somehow the ant that finds one of the solutions that works best, the other ants tend to follow that. And I think something similar happens. If the leading team develops a working solution for a particular thing, then that tends to be what works best for the other teams, unless someone has a strong argument for doing it another way. But what else should we do? If we have multiple teams working on a product and an architectural decision must be made, there's some platform decisions, there are things like that that have got to be made. And those are, oh, by the way, all those decisions are the types of things that an agile architecture thinking person is going to delay as long as possible or do it in as flexible a way as possible because they are ultimately agility reducing decisions. We would like to have, for example, a community spanning the teams that are concerned with that particular area. UI design is an example that I think everyone can think about because everyone's used a product that you can tell it had 4 different UI designers. Or you can tell that this part was built by this company that was acquired by another company, and they don't actually, you can tell when you're stepping from one product into another product, and you wish that it worked together. So yeah, getting teams to work together. So I will suggest a community, which is not a formal structure, at least unless we don't propose this as a formal structure with a manager and all the stuff that comes with that, because we believe that as soon as we, this is actually the way we interpret Conway's law, as soon as we create an organizational design, there's an unfortunate tendency for the software design to copy that. So we leave the imprint of our org chart in the software that we build, which is very likely not, and Conway observed this also, the late Conway observed that this is probably not the optimal architecture for the product once we understand the user needs better. So those are a couple of things that I think can help. A leading team pattern might be appropriate in some cases. Why not? Why instead of starting with 1,000 people, maybe we could start with one team, and once they figure some stuff out, then we could start rolling the other teams in. Or the other thing would be, once we're underway, let's have a community. If I'm on team A and working on the database or things related to persistence, we don't want all the database tables to get denormalized because I copied something that someone on team X is doing. And so we need a way for me to talk directly to the person with the same concern on team X or whatever it might be. And the communities have got to be in place. And management and Scrum Masters have a role here. I want them involved. What I don't want them to do is the coordination. What I want them to do, instead of being the person that takes the message from team A to team X, I want to be the person that makes sure that people on team A know who the people on team X are, and so that they can have a direct connection rather than becoming an intermediate coordinator.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see here, we had a question come in from Jabalani. Do you want to hop on audio and ask your question?
Yes, just give me a second. Yeah, so we're all agile practitioners, obviously, and agile is a fancy word that a lot of people like to use, particularly in the software space, and it's even used in marketing materials. But we find sometimes at the portfolio level that executive management, VPs and up, don't really understand how it works and how it trickles downstream, as it were, into value prioritization. So how do you manage up in that situation to explain to a vice president of operations or a CFO how it actually works and how it benefits the company?
One of the things that I love about the client that I'm working with the past few years, actually, I started my company without any plan. I just kind of jumped off a cliff, and somehow someone was looking out for me because I got a client that I worked with for several years on a large-scale Scrum adoption. It wasn't called less then, but fortunately, I was brought in by a senior executive, someone near enough the CEO, that was his reason for doing this. The agile adoption was to eliminate the idea of these separate products and get the teams to think about the larger view of product. This reduces the concept of portfolio quite a bit. It's what we think of as this is a product, this is a product, this is a product. at least with my main client, they started to realize these aren't actually separate products, are they? The customer doesn't care about our internal org structure, and the customer shouldn't have to know our internal organizational structure in order to use our products. Customer just wants the pieces to fit together, and products from the same team, products, so-called products from the same company really ought to work together. So I don't have that much trouble once I get to that level of a company. We want, I've come to see this, we really need the top-down and bottom-up engagement to make this work. I think if we're doing just a bottom-up approach, we can make some improvements, and I believe we can alleviate some of the team so we can have a palliative effect. But I think in the big picture, we're not necessarily increasing the organization's agility. So this comes back to the topic of system optimization goal. I'll give a counterexample. I recently observed an overall retrospective, which is a great practice, but this was an overall retrospective where upper management had not reached a consensus about the system optimization goal. What's the purpose of this thing that we're doing? Some people thought the purpose of this was to reduce confusion. I actually think confusion, if we're becoming agile, confusion is a necessary part of that. A discomfort is a necessary part of that. But if we're optimizing around, and we're doing this not explicitly a lot of times, we're doing it implicitly. We think that the process is working if people are less confused and people are more comfortable, which is, to me, that helps explain the popularity of Scrum of Scrums. It makes people less confused, it makes people more comfortable. I'm not seeing it actually increase agility. I don't know if I answered the question though. I guess the answer, I'll try again. I probably can't answer the question, but I've had the most success, just my experience, when I have top-down and bottom-up engagement. I don't think doing one of them separately is just going to irritate people.
That's good. That's good. Thank you.
Excellent. Thomas, you had a question. Please feel free to unmute and ask it.
Yeah, sorry, I have a lot of background noise, so I threw it in the chat. I guess I'm hearing a lot of misconceptions and anti-patterns that product owners could do. I'm curious if you have a favorite pattern or behavior that product owners should be doing more of.
Well, we want the, it depends whether we're talking about, so what I would call product owner, and I think what Ken Schwaber meant, and he clarified this when he wrote product owners, not proxies. The people that we're calling product owners are probably not what we would call a product owner. This is why I have the term team output owner. So if I'm actually a team, and people have commented on my video, I just realized I'm a team output owner. So those people, I want them to join teams. I want them to be on the team that they're working with. Of course, if they are the expert at the requirements, or they have more expertise than the other people do, or they have more work experience. And in some companies, you need to get to levels of management before you get people thinking gray hair. So if they're the most experienced, most knowledgeable people, we want those people on teams. So we want them to join teams. But I want to find a product owner is analogous to a product manager. If we have a job title like product, if we're talking about a real product company, there's typically, now this is unfortunate, but there's typically a product group. So the group of product management, which is distinct from, for some reason, it made sense at one time to do it this way, which is distinct from the development or IT or some other technical people versus the product people. And it could be even worse, we also have testing people in another department. And once upon a time, it made sense for, at least from a local perspective, to create these departmental structures. But yeah, I'm looking for who's a person, for example, who's this person who can decide whether to continue with this whole product development effort, whether to persevere or to pivot, to steal Eric Ries's terms. So that's, I think I just dodged another question. I don't think I answered the question. I'll try again. If I'm being called product owner, but I realize that I'm only a team output owner and there are 10 other teams working on what the actual product is, if we use a broad definition of product, then I want to be part of the team, and I don't want to be like once when I was a software architect, person who imposes solutions. I want to be the person that's part of a team working out solutions without any special title or special role on the team. And if I'm the real product owner, I want to realize that, yeah, I'm the real product owner. I'm the person who should be expressing the vision to everyone, to all the teams, and giving one prioritized list to all the teams. And this will probably take years, but we think about the perfection challenge of teams can all pull from one product backlog. Now, if the real product owner makes a prioritization decision, has to pivot, we do not need a reorganization. We only need to reprioritize the items in our product backlog, because we already have teams that have established the habit of learning new things, working with each other. We don't need to reorg in order to pivot to a different product strategy. And if we do need to reorganize, to pivot, to change the product strategy, that would be a signal that our organizational design isn't actually agile. We've built it, we've optimized it for solving one problem. Henry Ford learned that becoming too optimized for solving one problem, the more optimized we are for solving that problem, or the more adapted we are to that problem, the less adaptable we are. Become highly optimized to making just Model T Fords, 19 million of them. Now when it's time to introduce a new model line, everything has to change. Whole management approaches were uprooted because they were so optimized for a very narrow problem.
So again, it's all about understanding the system. Thank you. Let's see here. Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, are you able to hear me? I'm on my iPad, so it's a little funky.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. This gets into a little more of we have an assumption around optimizing the whole as opposed to a local optimization bias. And you spoke a little bit about the misconception of teams working on similar value work, which really resonates with me because I've seen this many times. So I would think if you're thinking of optimizing the whole, you would be looking at the work that teams are doing and trying to maybe create a function, a utility function that optimizes the whole by making sure everyone's working on the most important stuff at the time. Do you suggest monitoring that, or am I just like totally making some bad assumptions on what you should do to adjust and optimize over time?
Do I suggest monitoring or trying to quantify the value of different teams' works? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or looking at how do I bring up the value of all the teams? Kind of optimizing all the teams are working on. Or should I even be worried about that or adjusting that?
Well, I think that we're making it worse by suggesting that each team should have their own product backlog. And what we'd like to do, there's probably other ways to solve this. Our approach is that there is only one product backlog for a product. So if we have 5 teams working on the product, the 5 teams can all look at that product backlog, and they refine the backlog together. Either the whole teams or more likely team representatives do some of the overall refinement. So we already have the cross team. We've made the connections. So working from one backlog, we are able to instantly detect if we're working on, or if we had been working on low value things. I think so. A starting point might be, a useful exercise could be, okay, we had all these teams working on different things on their backlogs. Let's put them together into one backlog and have a product manager, someone at the, you might call chief product owner, but what I'll call the real product owner, put them in order. And then the stuff I've been doing, I thought was so important on my team, turns out to be towards the bottom of the list. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I'm also going to see maybe our team ought to be learning new skills. The underutilized capability in most organizations, people's ability to learn. I mean, that was kind of vague. Let me get a more practical example. I was just, I met with a company where there was Android development kept falling behind iOS development. Now, I was talking to my wife about this, and my wife has some technical knowledge, but she asked what might seem like a naive question. She says, why don't the iOS people help with the Android development? Well, that's a naive question, and only a beginner or an expert will ask that question, right? But someone, if I'm deep into this, I might think, well, and I understand. Now, I've programmed in Swift. It's very different. The iOS and Android. I understand they're very different environments, but specialization is for insects, and over specialization is at the root of inventory. The people with a lean background, I think, understand that we're trying to reduce inventory and over specialization. Our team just chops onions. That's not a useful thing when it's time for dessert in the kitchen. So yeah, why can't the team? They can learn. Now they're not going to be experts at it overnight. I don't want to pretend that the cost of learning is zero. But one of the things that I love about the PDX group are these mob programming sessions that are sponsored. I think if we're doing techniques like mob programming and pair programming, we can quite radically increase the speed of learning. So I'm not going to pretend it happens overnight. A less adoption, for example, we typically advertise it. This is going to take years to do. But I think we also underestimate people's ability to learn new things. And I don't know how an organization can become more agile without people learning new things constantly. So the answer, I guess, was let's consolidate our backlogs into one backlog in one force-ranked prioritized list, and it will become obvious.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Great. Had a quick question here from Chris. Can you restate misconception number 1? He was trying to remember it from the introductory statements.
Okay. And I'll, if you give me a minute, I'll send out a link that says in writing more coherently what I attempted to say this morning. But misconception number 1 is the idea that dependencies are inevitable, that dependencies are caused somehow by the laws of nature, laws of physics, and we just can't get around them. This is true, and that assumption is true in traditional work. I believe it's not true in knowledge creation work. I believe in knowledge creation work, dependencies are caused by our organizational design, the policies and structure of our company. For example of a policy would be private code policies. Either by reasons of policy or skills, our team only works on this code and can't make the change that we need to this thing in order to deliver an end-to-end feature. So that'd be an example of dependencies being reinforced, unfortunately, by Scrum sometimes, or by the way Scrum is being taught and implemented and interpreted.
Great. Well, thank you very much, MJ. This was, I really enjoyed the talk. Thank you so much for engaging us in the Q&A. We covered a lot of topics, and I think things that have sort of provided nice progression with some of the other discussions we've had around complexity and how to navigate just the increasingly more complex and times chaotic worlds that we live in.